Before anyone says, I know, this is very cliched, but seeing that the show is going to end up in a fiery ball of mess, I've decided to look at the past and try to find out my top 25 episodes. So, yeah, enjoy the list and remember, it's my opinion, so please don't judge, alright? Alright, so let's get on with the list. Number 25, The Sad Story of Henry and Edward Gordon Henry. As a child, these two stories were one of my favorites, as these always stood out to me. This is just a classic fun little story. A train stops in a tunnel and refuses to move out. Then some pathetic methods are tried to pull him out, which obviously fail, after which the engine is just bricked up. It's hilarious. One thing I really like about this episode is its moral. Henry is really stubborn and selfish. He only cares about his paint. He doesn't give a damn about the passengers. Therefore, I believe that the Fat Controller's punishment was justified. I think another reason why I loved this episode as a child was that when my Thomas and Gordon DVD got old, it started to glitch out in some parts, and Edward Gordon Henry is one of them. It always used to just glitch out the part from Gordon stopping to Henry being let out. But now that we have YouTube, everyone can enjoy these two episodes. Number 24, All at Sea. Where do I begin with this episode? This episode, in one word, is just relaxing. It's more of a peaceful episode with a very relaxing story. It is also very relatable, at least in Duck's perspective, of course. There are many people out there who have many big dreams and would like to accomplish them. So I think this episode in that way relates to a lot of people. I also really like the dynamic that Percy and Duck have here. Duck is just there having his own dreams and thoughts while Percy just comes and just thinks about how silly he is. It's very humorous. Not just here, but I overall love the dynamic that Percy and Duck shared throughout season 2 and even season 3. I wish they had more episodes together. The music is very nice to listen to. The harbor theme just fits so perfectly with this episode, and the shots with Duck traveling to the junction was just so pleasing to watch, especially with his theme song playing. And let's not forget the last shot. The last shot is probably the most beautiful ending to an episode, maybe in the entire show. And the last line was also really beautiful. Although I'm still wondering why Thomas is there. But overall, I loved this episode, and it's something that I still really like.
Duck still wonders about the lands beyond the horizon, but he enjoys being with friends most of all, and I think he knows that sometimes the best travels are those we can only dream about. Don't you?
Number 23, The Diseasel. What can I say now? I love Bill and Ben. They can be innocent sometimes, but when it comes to trickery, they can be devils. And nowhere else is it better shown than this episode right here. What I find a little amusing here is how odd Bill and Ben's plan is. Their trucks are stolen, so what do? They keep playing tricks until the one who did steal has a sort of mental breakdown. That is just hilarious. This episode also has some of the best music and quotes. The music during when Bill and Ben trick Boko is just phenomenal. I also like how it first introduced Boko with that music, and you think he's just another bad diesel, but then you realize that no, he's a very friendly guy. And yes, I love this episode also because it introduces Boko, and I love his giddy face a lot. It looks just hilarious. Anyways, this is one of the funniest episodes of the show to date. Number 22, Gallant Old Engine. As a kid and still now, I loved this episode a lot. I liked how it had Scarloy as the main guy who was telling the story. It sounded like an interesting chapter from a history book. The model work and music are just fantastic in this episode. The lighting, the setting makes it look as if Renes is actually going through some huge storm with a passenger train. We see him struggling through that storm. The atmosphere just makes me feel like it's a real train that was stuck there. And I think these kind of sceneries just cannot be replicated in the CGI era. They are good, but nowhere near season 4 and 5. The storm theme is also used perfectly here. It kind of fits with Renee's on how he kept on pushing himself to the limit. I also really liked his attitude here. He's not yielding until he gets everybody home safe and sound, even though he's worn out. And I love when he returns in the end. All in all, I think this is the best Renee's episode to date. Number 21. Cranky Bugs. I think any person who watches Thomas has probably watched this episode. This is a legendary episode because it's the first episode to season 5, which was an awesome season, the first episode to introduce Cranky, and the first episode with Alec Baldwin narrating. And oh boy, what do I tell about it? Just listen to this clip.
Help! Call the engines from inside the shed. I can't! Called Cranky.
That line is so recognizable and also so hilarious. Now this was the episode that introduced the very iconic character, Cranky, who was still regularly used up to season 24. He's such a recognizable character, and for a known Audrey character, he is very good. You just can't imagine the series without him. And also this episode started out season 5. This was the first episode to come out after Audrey's death in 1997. And I just want to say what a huge risk it was to make an entire series with non-Audrey stories. But surprisingly, the risk played off. The series was decided that it would go in a more action-packed direction, which paid off well for the show as a whole. And this episode was the first to introduce us to this. Cranky Bugs for that is a legendary episode, which for those reasons is still remembered by all fans today. Number 20. Mike's Whistle. Wait, a CGI episode? No, you like the show? You can only like classic story episodes. No more than that. They're good, but not as good as them. As I said, it's my opinion. Yes, I know a CGI episode. How could I? Blah blah blah. But this is my list, so my opinion. This episode gives us an amazing adaptation of the railway series story of the same name, with sometimes even word for word. It just boggles my mind how in the CGI era, the creators of the show even considered the idea of adapting railway series stories. If you told me in 2014 that railway series characters like the Smallies would be introduced in the show, I would have slapped you. But yet, we still got them in a wonderful trio of episodes, of which this is also a part. Lost Treasure took a huge step in the franchise as a whole by introducing railway series characters. First time we are seeing a new Audrey character in like 2 decades. And this was the first railway series story to air since Mind Dad Bite, which was over 15 seasons ago. Seeing them use the book's dialogue was so surreal to see. This episode also had many surprises. I honestly was not expecting them to use Mr. Fergus Duncan, aka the small controller. Actually thought it would be maybe Hat or even Percival. I'm still surprised that they rendered a small controller for this, let alone mentioning his actual name is Fergus Duncan, which by the way is something that even the original book didn't do. I also was not expecting the drivers to speak, and their interactions with the engines was so good and pleasing to see. It was so good to finally see them behave like characters and not blind humans who are just along for the ride. The only weird thing I found was that the ending, which was kind of cheesy to be honest. But still, this was a legendary episode for the CGI series, which was huge and successful. Number 19. You Can't Win. This one is also a great episode, but not just for season 4, but for the entire show. I myself have a lot of respect for Duke, seeing what the guy has been through. and I can't say I have a straightforward answer on why I like it so much. I just do. It's a really beautiful looking episode. I also really loved Angela's and Carlin's voice for Duke. They perfectly show Duke on how he's tired and panting, but still struggles to get the passengers home. The fact that we see Duke struggling to get up the hill but still is so determined just shows how great he is. You have to give him praise for that. My favorite part was definitely the end where Stuart gets his comeuppance for teasing Duke. The moral is also good too. Respect your elders or else you never know what might happen. Number 18. Thomas the Babysitter. I don't know why, but this episode to me is a true pleasure to watch. I remember when season 19 was rolling its episodes, everyone said that till then this was one of the best episodes. What's also cool about it is that it also has a baby character featured in the show. I know it's not much, but still, it's quite nice to see. It was also nice to see him return in season 24. Yes, I would have loved to see this episode in the model era, but still, I like what we got in the CGI. Also, while I can agree that baby crying noises are annoying, but come on, what else do you expect it to do? Talk about stock shares? You have to run an engine? I also really like the character interactions between Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle. It's one of those times where they actually work together, and it's really nice to see them all trying to calm the baby. I also loved how this episode showcased Thomas's caring side beautifully. I love the scenery, I love the music, and I especially loved the characters. Number 17. Toad Stands By. There are many reasons as to why I prefer Oliver over Duck, but my biggest reason is that Oliver is a complete badass. He gets shoved into a turntable by the trucks, so what does he do in return? He rips apart the leader in half. The ending alone deserves this spot on the list. Oliver's character development is just awesome. He goes from a little arrogant engine to a guy who takes no nonsense. I like Scruffy too. George Carlin did Scruffy's voice perfectly. He sounds like some old gangster. He also did the song very well. Angela's did good too, but I found it amusing how he was just shouting the lyrics.
When the orders all stop out, when the grace is falling, we just push them down the well. Pop goes on the...
But I also did find Carlin's Toad voice kind of annoying. Speaking of Toad, I liked his role here too. This is the first time where he actually spoke, and Oliver wouldn't have been able to defeat Scruffy without him. I loved this episode as a child, and I still love it today. Oliver is one of the greatest Great Western engines to date. Number 16. Thomas and the Jet Engine. I really like how, like some other episodes, this just forgets realism. This episode came out in a time where realism was still a huge factor within the series. And for that fact, I've seen many people say that this is one of the, if not the, worst classic series episodes. But for me, I don't care. This episode was just so hilarious and maybe the most funniest episode in the entire show. But that's because of its lines like this.
Hi, Gordon. Bye, Gordon. Gordon could not believe what he had seen.
And the fact that this is unrealistic adds to the fact of how fun it is. You always think about what moron decided to fill the jet with fuel. And my god, did Michelangelo's energy show here. He must have been having a fun time while recording these. The way he shouts or does the voices is just so good to watch. His energy is also amazing, and the music just adds to the excitement.
The driver tried to put on the brakes, but Thomas couldn't stop. Oh boy!
Probably the most funniest episode ever. Number 15. Toby and the Flood. This episode was probably the most difficult episode in the entire series to film. But still, they pulled it off brilliantly. This episode is basically a high action-packed adventure that can get anyone in a hyped mood. I find it amazing how they created the river and the dam exploding. Sure, it may be over the top, but god was it done brilliantly. I know the episode is very unrealistic, but still, it is just awesome. This episode gives you a suspenseful feeling, especially when the dam breaks. Talking about the dam, the sets look amazing too. The dark sky, the lighting, and the rushing river gives it a very dark and intense feeling. Also, is it just me, or does the water look like it has cocoa powder in it? The music is also incredible. The music at the beginning of the episode was one of the best pieces of music in the show. Now this episode does have problems though. Like, why did Toby suddenly stop in the middle of the bridge? And why did they attach the rope to Toby instead of the actual bridge part? But anyways, this episode is still awesome. It's an epic episode which can never get old. Number 14. Brakeman and Deputation. These are one of Season 2's best episodes. Donald and Douglas are characters who take nonsense from no one, and that's why they are one of my favorite characters. When a brakeman troubles them, they smash it to smithereens, and even after that they try to show how useful they can be. Everything that could go wrong with them goes wrong. You would think the Fat Controller would have had enough by now, but they still have their spirit. We see how all the engines band together to send a message across to the Fat Controller. And I also really love Percy here. And my god, George Carlin voices Donald and Douglas perfectly. It's also kind of amusing how someone like George Carlin could give such a good Scottish accent. I also really love their theme. It is one of my favorites. I also like how it has a Scottish tune to it. I also found the spiteful Brakeman's character quite good. He doesn't have more than 5 lines, but that's all you need. You can see by his face that he means trouble. Also, for that shot of his face being pulled up, is he still alive or is he dead? Because he has literally nothing left of him, so he's kind of the first character to die on screen. But he kind of deserved it. Donald and Douglas are 2 wonderful no-nonsense characters who are introduced in these 2 episodes. Number 13. Rusty and the Boulder. Alright, I know what most of you are thinking. Why this Indiana Jones and Disney crossover thingy? While yes, that may be true, this one is a little different. This is a really very debatable episode, but I can totally see why some fans wouldn't like this. Its story is silly and won't definitely not fit in within the original Railway series. And this could also be considered one of the first episodes to bring in one-off characters like Thumper and even Boulder. Also in a time where realism was a huge factor still, this stuck out like a weird one. But the reason I liked it was because of the amount of effort and emotion put into it. They never actually acknowledge if the Boulder is alive or not. They leave it to the audience to decide. The shots of his face were just so creepy. We don't know who or what is it. And that mysteriousness is what's so great about this episode. It just has such an eerie feel to it that just unsettles you. The Boulder seems to be conveying sadness about his home just getting destroyed. The Boulder chasing scenes as a child were terrifying. And the last line of the Topham Hatt was one of the most chilling lines ever. It's as if the Fat Controller knows something about it that we don't.
We should have left this part of the island alone, he said thoughtfully.
Now for the action. I personally loved it. It might be unrealistic, but it always had me on the edge of my seat. I mean, the Boulder is humongous compared to Rusty. It's an actual threat. Also, this is the first time we see an actual explosion in the show. And holy crap, was it awesome. Do I know how it blew up? No. Do I care? Not so much. I mean, this had the engines just dodging and narrowly escaping big huge boulders. The sets also look ginormous. I don't know how, but the hill and the quarry sets look as if they go on forever, even with different camera angles. I think that's the part in why this episode feels so large and big. As a kid, I never saw a single glimpse of season 5, as the DVDs never came to India. And the first time I saw this episode as a kid on YouTube, I was honestly surprised that that was a Thomas episode. Before watching this, I had seen Mad Bomber, so I thought maybe a fan made this. But then I realized that, no, this was an episode from the show. I still remembered my little cousin running away when this came, while I enjoyed all the destruction of them. And not gonna lie, I actually kind of wished maybe an engine would get crushed. You know, typical childhood dreams. I loved the action and eeriness of it. And overall, this episode entertained me a lot. Number 12. Stepney Gets Lost. I will say one thing. While this episode may not be the scariest episode, this is hands down the darkest episode of Thomas. An engine is about to be dropped in a pool of lava and then melted down for scrap. I don't know about others, but that just sounds like a torture scene from a horror movie. This was one of those episodes that always stuck with me as a kid. It wasn't my favorite back then, but I really started to like it as I grew older. And also these sets. These sets are scary. They may be very simple, but the way they were lit made them terrifying. The bright red smelters is pretty much hell for trains. And I don't know why, but because there is no music, this makes the episode much more disturbing. With the limitation of children's TV, I didn't think it went too far. I mean, we don't see the crow do anything and Stepney is finally saved. But damn, Britt and David went full out on this one. I also really like Aaron and Bert here. Before they turned into average bullies, they were one of the most scariest characters in the whole show. Well, before Diesel 10 at least. Anyway, Stepney Gets Lost was one of the darkest episodes of the show. And I don't know why, but I just really liked the final line.
Bluebells forever!
Number 11. Percy's Promise. Wow, was this episode exciting! Whenever this episode came on in my Ghost Train DVD, I used to get hyped up, as this was one of my favorite Percy related episodes, and I think this is one of Percy's best episodes ever. Percy's character changes every now and then according to the season, with him being stubborn, brave, or just put upon. I think this episode is where we see the best side of Percy. Now, I understand that this is supposed to be before Percy takes the plunge, and some people are a little cross with that, but personally for me, I think it has a more of a season 3 kind of vibe. I don't see it as a much of a season 2 episode. Plus, I think during season 2, it would be hard to sacrifice the Percy model for those water sequences. Talking about the water sequence, how did they film that? I mean, was the motor there in the engine or was it an empty shell? How did it not get damaged? Was there even rails under the track? Or was Percy on a pulley sort of thing? Was the water electrocuted or something during filming? I assume they just put the model in the water and just pulled it by string, but who knows? It still amazes me how the crew put so much effort into this, from the lighting to the atmosphere and even the models. Percy's model towards the end looks like it has been through a war zone, and the cloudy atmosphere with rain just bucketing down onto Percy was just awesome. I also loved to listen to the storm theme as Percy started his journey. That and the sets make us feel worried for Percy. We wonder if Percy will pull through or not. But Percy did not give up, and proved that in even situations like these, he can be brave and useful.